The rain fell mercilessly on Captain James Reeves as he stood frozen in disbelief, his heart slamming against his ribcage. There, huddled against an overflowing dumpster behind the gas station, was a skeletal German shepherd with haunting eyes he would recognize anywhere. Shadow, his partner through 3 combat tours, was now nothing but bones and matted fur, a rusted chain around his neck. But when those intelligent eyes met his, James knew with absolute certainty. This was the dog who had saved his life in Kandahar, the dog who, according to official military records, had been given a dignified retirement 2 years ago. The truth was far more devastating than anything James could have imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind cut through James Reeves's jacket as he pulled into the small gas station on the outskirts of Millbrook. The rural Pennsylvania town wasn't much to look at, especially in the dreary October rain. But after 15 hours of driving, he was grateful for anywhere to stretch his legs and refuel. His cross-country drive from Fort Carson to his new assignment at Fort Drum had taken longer than expected due to unexpected construction detours. James filled his tank methodically, the routine motions a stark contrast to the turmoil in his mind. 3 years since his medical retirement from the Army Rangers and the transition to civilian life had been anything but smooth. Now, returning to active duty as a training officer, a position that accommodated his permanent limp, felt like both a victory and a reminder of everything he'd lost. As he replaced the gas pump, the distant sound of metal scraping against concrete caught his attention. Probably just garbage cans toppling in the wind, he thought. But something, instinct perhaps, the same instinct that had kept him alive in war zones, made him follow the sound toward the back of the station. That's when he saw it. A dog, barely recognizable as such, huddled against the dumpster. Its ribs protruded sharply against dull, matted fur. A heavy chain, attached to a frayed collar, was tangled around one of the dumpster's wheels, leaving the animal unable to seek shelter from the rain. James approached slowly, careful not to startle the creature. The dog raised its head weakly, ears flattening in fear. And then, in a moment that stopped James's world on its axis, their eyes met. Those eyes. Amber with flecks of gold around the pupils, intelligent, assessing, and despite the animal's obvious suffering, still somehow dignified. Shadow? James whispered, his voice barely audible over the patter of rain. The dog's ears twitched. A tremor ran through its emaciated frame. No, it couldn't be. Shadow was supposed to be enjoying retirement with a Handler family in Virginia. The official paperwork had crossed James's desk 3 days before his own medical discharge. Military working dog, K435, call sign Shadow, honorably retired after 7 years of distinguished service. Yet as James crouched down, moving slowly toward the terrified animal, the distinctive scar across the dog's muzzle came into view, a mark from the same IED blast that had left James with shrapnel in his leg and 3 of their team members in body bags. Shadow, he said again, more firmly this time. It's me, boy. The German shepherd struggled to stand, paws slipping on the wet concrete before collapsing back down. But his tail, once proud and powerful, gave a single feeble thump against the ground. James felt his chest constrict painfully. This was Shadow, his Shadow, the dog who had detected explosives that saved their entire unit, the partner who had stayed by his side through the worst firefight of his life, who had dragged him to safety when a blast left him unable to walk. The dog who slept beside his hospital bed for weeks during recovery. Rage and disbelief warred within him as he gently approached. How had Shadow ended up here, starving and abandoned behind a rural gas station? Who was responsible for this betrayal? "It's okay," James murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I've got you now." As he carefully extended his hand, palm up, Shadow sniffed tentatively. Recognition sparked in those intelligent eyes, and the dog whimpered, a sound so full of pain and relief that James felt tears burning behind his eyes. "Sir, can I help you with something?" James turned to see a young gas station attendant watching nervously from the corner of the building, a cigarette dangling from his fingers. "This dog," James said, struggling to keep his voice level. "How long has he been here?" The attendant shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "Couple days, maybe. Some old guy in a pickup dropped him off. Said he couldn't keep him anymore." He took a drag from his cigarette. "Boss said to call animal control tomorrow if nobody claimed him." James didn't trust himself to respond. Instead, he turned back to Shadow, examining the heavy chain. It was secured with a padlock to the collar that had clearly once been fitted properly, but now hung loosely around Shadow's neck. The dog's military tags were gone. With gentle movements, James shrugged off his jacket despite the rain and carefully draped it over Shadow's trembling body. "I need bolt cutters," he told the attendant, "and water, clean water, now." Something in his tone, perhaps the same command presence that had led men into combat, spurred the young man into action. He disappeared inside and returned moments later with a pair of bolt cutters and a bottle of water. James carefully cut through the chain, freeing Shadow from the dumpster. The dog made no attempt to run. He couldn't have even if he'd wanted to. With practiced hands, James checked for immediate injuries: dehydration, malnutrition, pressure sores from the collar, and infected paws. Professional assessment couldn't mask his growing fury. Shadow was a military working dog, he told the increasingly uncomfortable attendant. He served 3 tours in Afghanistan, saved dozens of lives, mine included. James pulled out his wallet and extracted several bills. "For the water and the bolt cutters. Is there a veterinarian in town?" Dr. Morgan's clinic is about 3 miles east," the attendant replied, taking the money reluctantly. "But they close at 6. James checked his watch. 5:37 p.m. "Call them," he ordered. "Tell them it's an emergency. Tell them Captain James Reeves is bringing in a retired military working dog in critical condition." As the attendant hurried to make the call, James carefully gathered Shadow into his arms. The dog, once a powerful 70 pounds of muscle and discipline, now weighed almost nothing. Shadow whimpered again, but made no move to resist, instead pressing his head weakly against James's chest, a gesture so familiar it broke something open inside him. "They've got you, partner," James whispered, carrying Shadow toward his car. "I'm not letting you go again." The attendant jogged back to them. "They'll stay open, said to come right away." James nodded his thanks, carefully laying Shadow across the back seat of his car. The dog's breathing was labored, each inhale rattling ominously. His condition was worse than James had initially assessed. Moving with renewed urgency, he slid into the driver's seat. As he prepared to drive away, James caught sight of himself in the rearview mirror. His face was rigid with a determination he hadn't felt since leaving active duty. Whoever was responsible for Shadow's condition would be held accountable. The system that had promised to care for a dog who had saved American lives would answer for this betrayal. But first, Shadow needed immediate medical attention. The drive to the veterinary clinic was a blur of rain-slicked roads and constant glances at the back seat, where Shadow lay motionless under James's jacket. Questions raced through his mind. How had Shadow gone from honorable retirement to abandonment? Who was the old guy who had dumped him? What had happened during the 2 years since James had reluctantly said goodbye, trusting the military's assurance that his partner would be well cared for? Dr. Morgan's clinic was a small, single-story building with a neon open sign still glowing in the window. As James carefully lifted Shadow from the car, the front door opened to reveal a woman in her 40s, her expression shifting from professional readiness to shock as she took in Shadow's condition. "Bring him straight back," she directed, holding the door wide. "I'm Dr. Morgan." James carried Shadow through to an examination room where a veterinary technician was already preparing supplies. With gentle hands, they transferred Shadow to the examination table. Under the bright clinical lights, Shadow's condition was even more alarming. His once glossy black and tan coat now dull and patchy, his powerful frame wasted to skin and bone. "He's a retired military working dog," James explained as Dr. Morgan began her examination. "German Shepherd, 7 years old. We served together in Afghanistan. According to records, he was placed in a retirement home 2 years ago, but obviously..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Dr. Morgan worked methodically, checking vital signs and inserting an IV line for fluids. "Severe malnutrition and dehydration," she confirmed. "Infected paw pads, pressure wounds from the collar, and what looks like untreated heartworm." She looked up at James, her eyes compassionate but direct. "He's in critical condition, Captain Reeves. I'll do everything I can, but you should be prepared." James nodded stiffly, his throat too tight for words. Shadow's eyes remained fixed on him, maintaining the connection despite his suffering. That unwavering loyalty, even after whatever betrayal had led to this moment, was both heartbreaking and infuriating. "I'm not leaving him," James stated. "Not a question, but a declaration." Dr. Morgan nodded. "There's a chair in the corner. This will take some time." As she and the technician worked to stabilize Shadow, James finally allowed himself to process the reality of what had happened. Shadow, who had been decorated for valor, who had saved more lives than anyone could count, had somehow fallen through the cracks of the system meant to protect him. Instead of the comfortable retirement he deserved, he had endured neglect and abandonment before being discarded like trash. James pulled out his phone, scrolling to find a number he hadn't called in over a year. Captain Michael Lawson had been their unit commander and had handled Shadow's retirement processing personally. He would have answers, and if he didn't, he would know who did. As the phone rang, James watched Dr. Morgan insert a feeding tube with practiced efficiency. Shadow's eyes were beginning to droop from the sedative they'd administered, but they still sought James's face, as if reassuring himself that his former handler was really there. "I'll find out who did this to you," James promised quietly. "And I'll make it right." The call went to voicemail. James left a terse message requesting an immediate callback regarding Shadow's situation. Then he settled into the chair, prepared for the long night ahead. What James couldn't yet know was that finding Shadow was just the beginning. The coming days would uncover a trail of systemic neglect, corruption, and betrayal that extended far beyond one dog. The journey to justice would not only give Shadow a second chance, but would ultimately transform James's own path, reigniting a sense of purpose he had thought was lost forever. But in this moment, as rain lashed against the clinic windows and machines monitored Shadow's vital signs, James made a silent vow. He would not fail his partner again. Whatever it took, however long the road ahead, he would uncover the truth and ensure that no dog who served their country would ever be discarded again. Shadow's eyes finally closed, his body surrendering to exhaustion and medication. James leaned forward, gently placing his hand on the dog's side, taking comfort in the rhythm of his breathing, shallow but steady. For the first time in years, despite the dire circumstances, James felt the fog of purposelessness lifting. He had found Shadow against impossible odds. Now he would find justice, no matter where that path might lead. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. We'd love to hear from our global family of animal lovers and military supporters. Welcome to Valor Companions, where we share stories of extraordinary bonds between service members and the animals who stand beside them through the toughest battles, both on and off the battlefield. We're on a mission to reach 100,000 subscribers. To help us advocate for better protection of military working dogs, so if this story touches your heart, please hit that subscribe button. Now, let's continue with James and Shadow's powerful journey. Dawn broke over the small veterinary clinic, pale light filtering through the blinds, to find James Reeves in the same position he'd maintained all night, seated beside Shadow's kennel, one hand resting gently on the sedated dog's flank. "Doctor." Morgan entered quietly, clipboard in hand, her expression revealing both concern and cautious optimism. "He's stabilized," she said, checking Shadow's IV fluids. "He's severely malnourished and has several infections, but he's responding well to treatment. German Shepherds are remarkably resilient." "He's always been a fighter," James replied, his voice rough from lack of sleep. His phone lay silent on the chair beside him. Captain Lawson had not returned his call. Dr. Morgan hesitated, then pulled up a rolling stool. "Captain Reeves, I need to ask, this dog has a microchip." James's head snapped up. "You scanned him?" "Standard procedure for strays," she explained. "But here's the thing, it's registered to the Department of Defense, not to an individual. And according to the registration data, this dog was transferred to Meridian security contractors 2 years ago." James frowned. "Meridian? That doesn't make sense. Military working dogs who retire are either adopted by their handlers or placed with suitable families. Shadow was supposed to go to a family in Virginia, a former handler who specifically requested him. Well, the records indicate otherwise." Dr. Morgan handed him a printout of the microchip information. "Meridian has a facility about 40 miles north of here. They provide private security services, often hire veterans. They also train and deploy working dogs." The information hit James like a physical blow. Shadow hadn't been given the dignified retirement he'd been promised. Instead, he'd been transferred to a private contractor, likely to continue working despite his age and injuries. But that still didn't explain how he'd ended up abandoned behind a gas station, starving and neglected. "He needs to stay here for at least 3 days, Dr. Morgan continued. "IV nutrition, medication for the infections, and careful monitoring. After that, with proper care, he has a good chance at recovery." She hesitated again. "The bill will be substantial if financial assistance is—" "Money isn't an issue," James interrupted firmly. "Whatever he needs, and I'll need documentation of his condition when you found him, including photos, detailed medical records, everything." Dr. Morgan studied him carefully. "You're building a case." "I'm finding the truth," James corrected, gently stroking Shadow's ear. "And then I'm making sure this never happens to another military dog." As Dr. Morgan left to tend to other patients, James settled back in his chair, memories flooding back unbidden. The first time he'd met Shadow, not the powerful, disciplined working dog he would become, but a high-energy 18-month-old recruit at the Military Working Dog Training Center at Lackland Air Force Base. 6 years earlier, Lackland Air Force Base, Texas. "He's a washout," Staff Sergeant Miller announced, leading James toward the training kennel. "Smart as hell, but too independent. Won't follow commands consistently enough for patrol certification." James followed the veteran dog trainer down the row of kennels, skeptical but intrigued. As a newly commissioned Army Ranger preparing for his first deployment, he'd been selected for an experimental cross-branch canine handler program. Now he was being offered a problem dog that regular trainers had given up on. "What's his issue?" James asked, stopping in front of a kennel housing a striking black and tan German shepherd who watched them with alert, intelligent eyes. Doesn't respond to traditional training methods, Miller explained, overthinks everything, wants to understand why before he obeys. He snorted, like trying to train a too smart teenager. We call him Shadow because he's always watching, assessing. Trainers before me wanted to wash him out completely, send him to a civilian home. James met the dog's intense gaze, seeing not defiance but intelligence. So why offer him to me? Miller shrugged. New program, trying new approaches. You've got the highest problem-solving aptitude scores we've seen. Thought maybe you two might understand each other. He handed James a leash. Take him to the training yard. See if you can get him to run the basic obstacle course. In the yard, James did something unexpected. Instead of immediately commanding Shadow through the obstacles, he sat on the ground, back against a wall, and simply observed the dog. Shadow, clearly anticipating standard training routines, appeared confused by this deviation. After several minutes of mutual assessment, Shadow cautiously approached. They don't understand you, do they? James said quietly. You need to know the why behind the what. He reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out the course diagram the trainers had given him. This is what they want from you, a means to an end. But you and I know there's more to it than blindly following orders. Shadow's ears perked forward with interest as James spoke, his head tilting slightly, as if truly listening. For the next hour, James did what no other trainer had tried. He walked the course with Shadow, demonstrating each obstacle himself before asking the dog to attempt it, explaining the purpose behind each command. By day's end, the training officers watched in disbelief as Shadow executed the entire course flawlessly, responding to James's commands with unprecedented precision. I'll take him, James told Miller afterward, as Shadow leaned against his leg. We understand each other. Miller shook his head in amazement. What did you do differently? James smiled slightly. I didn't try to break his independence. I gave it purpose. 3 months later, after intensive specialized training, James and Shadow deployed to Afghanistan as part of a Ranger reconnaissance unit. What had been seen as Shadow's liability, his independent thinking, became his greatest asset in the unpredictable terrain of combat operations. 4 years earlier, Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. The mission had gone catastrophically wrong. What should have been routine reconnaissance had turned into an ambush, leaving James's 4-man team separated from their support unit and pinned down by insurgent fire in an abandoned compound. Comms still down, Specialist Wilson reported, voice tight with tension as bullets impacted the mud walls around them. No radio contact with base. Staff Sergeant Murphy, the team leader, swore under his breath. We need to move before they bring in reinforcements. There's a ravine half a click east that could provide cover. James checked Shadow, who had been scanning the perimeter attentively. The dog's behavior seemed off, not scared but insistent, oriented consistently toward the west, away from the direction Murphy was suggesting. Wait, James said. Shadow's trying to tell us something. He'd learned to trust the dog's instincts, which often perceived threats human senses missed. Murphy scowled. We don't have time for dog whispering, Reeves. East is our best option. Just give me 1 minute, James insisted, following as Shadow led him to a partially collapsed wall on the western side of the compound. The dog began, pawing at the ground near a pile of debris, whining softly. James carefully moved aside some fallen masonry, revealing what appeared to be a narrow tunnel entrance. It's an escape route, he realized. Probably connects to the network of irrigation. Tunnels in this area, Murphy assessed it quickly, could be our way out, or a trap. Shadow would sense an ambush, James countered. He's telling us it's clear. With no better options, the team entered the tunnel, Shadow leading the way. For nearly an hour they navigated the dark, cramped passage until they finally emerged in a dry riverbed 2 miles from the compound, well behind enemy lines. That night, safely back at base after coordinating extraction with their unit, Murphy approached James as he was settling Shadow in for the night. "You were right to trust your dog," the staff sergeant admitted gruffly. "That tunnel probably saved our lives." James nodded, knowing the acknowledgement didn't come easily to the by-the-book officer. "Shadow isn't just following commands. He's a partner making decisions." Murphy considered this. Most handlers wouldn't give their dogs that much latitude. "Most handlers haven't seen what happens when you let them think for themselves," James replied, scratching Shadow behind the ears. It was the first of many instances where Shadow's unconventional training and the unique bond he shared with James would prove invaluable. Their reputation grew among special operations teams, who began specifically requesting the Ranger and his thinking dog for high-risk missions. Present day, Dr. Morgan's veterinary clinic. James was pulled from his memories by a slight movement, Shadow's paw twitching as he dreamed. Despite his weakened state, the dog's fighting spirit remained. The years had not diminished the extraordinary intelligence in those amber eyes, nor the loyalty that had saved James's life more than once. A wave of fresh anger swept through him. Shadow had given everything in service to his country, only to be discarded when he was no longer useful. The betrayal cut deep, not just for what had been done to Shadow, but for what it represented, a system that used loyalty and then abandoned it. James pulled out his phone again, this time calling his commanding officer at Fort Drum to request emergency leave. As he explained the situation, leaving out his suspicions about Meridian for now, he traced the scar along Shadow's muzzle, a permanent reminder of the day that had changed both their lives forever, the day that had ultimately led to their separation. When James had been injured in that final IED blast, Shadow had refused to leave his side, even as medics tried to move. James to the evacuation helicopter. In the chaos that followed, surgeries, rehabilitation, medical retirement, they had been separated. By the time James was stable enough to inquire about adopting Shadow, he'd been told the dog had already been processed out of the program and placed with another family. He'd accepted that explanation, believing Shadow was enjoying a peaceful retirement. The reality that his partner had been transferred to a private contractor and then somehow abandoned was a betrayal James would not accept. His commanding officer granted the emergency leave without hesitation, respecting both James's history with the military working dog program and the exceptional circumstances. "Take whatever time you need," Major Parker told him. "And Reeves, if there's something wrong with the MWD retirement system, you've got the full weight of this unit behind you to fix it." James ended the call, determination solidifying into resolve. Shadow had protected him in war. Now he would fight for Shadow, and not just for Shadow, but for every military working dog who deserved better than abandonment after years of service. Dr. Morgan returned with medication for Shadow's V. "He's starting to wake up," she noted. The sedation was light, just enough to help him rest. She checked his vital signs again. His will to survive is remarkable, considering his condition. Many dogs would have given up. "Giving up isn't in his training," James replied, leaning forward as Shadow's eyes began to flutter open. "We were taught to complete the mission, no matter the cost." As Shadow's amber eyes focused on James, recognition sparking in their depths, the captain made a silent promise to his former partner. This mission would end differently, with truth, with justice, and with Shadow never again wondering where. His partner had gone. 2 days passed with James rarely leaving Shadow's side. The German Shepherd's condition improved steadily, though Dr. Morgan cautioned that full recovery would take months, not days. Shadow now recognized James consistently, his tail offering weak wags whenever his former handler approached the kennel. "He's strong enough for short walks," Dr. Morgan told James on the morning of the third day. "Fresh air would do him good, just around the clinic grounds, nothing strenuous." James carefully attached a soft leash to Shadow's new collar. Dr. Morgan had removed the old one, preserving it as evidence of neglect. The contrast between the professional military working dog James had known and the frail animal struggling to stand beside him struck a painful chord. "Easy, buddy," he murmured, supporting Shadow's weight as they made their way slowly outside. The autumn air was crisp, sunlight filtering through the changing leaves surrounding the small clinic. James guided Shadow to a patch of grass where the dog could rest. As Shadow settled, James's phone vibrated with an incoming call from an unfamiliar number. "Captain Reeves speaking," he answered. "Captain, this is Claire Dawson, Veteran Affairs Liaison from Congressman Walker's office." The woman's voice was brisk but friendly. "Your former commanding officer, Major Parker, contacted us regarding your situation with a military working dog. The congressman has taken a personal interest in your case." James straightened, surprised by the rapid response. Congressman Walker was a decorated veteran himself, who had sponsored several bills protecting military personnel and assets. "I appreciate the congressman's interest," James replied cautiously. "He'd like to meet with you, today if possible. He's currently in district and can be at your location by this afternoon. Would that work for you?" James looked down at Shadow, who was watching him attentively. "Yes, we'll be here at Millbrook Veterinary Clinic." After ending the call, James received another, this one from Captain Lawson, finally returning his message. "Reeves," the familiar voice greeted him, "got your message about Shadow. Frankly, I'm shocked. According to our records, he was transferred to the military working dog adoption program after his retirement. He should have gone to that handler in Virginia, guy named Thornton, who worked with Shadow during training." "Well, he didn't," James replied tersely. "According to his microchip, Shadow was transferred to Meridian Security Contractors. Now he's malnourished, infected, and abandoned. Someone's lying, Michael. I need to know who." There was a long pause. "This doesn't make sense," Lawson finally said. "I personally signed the retirement papers. Shadow was supposed to get the standard package, medical benefits, adoption priority to former handlers. Hell, you were first on that list before your medical discharge complications." James felt a flicker of surprise. "I was. They told me I was ineligible due to my medical status and housing situation during rehabilitation." "That's not right," Lawson said slowly. "Your status shouldn't have affected handler adoption priority. Look, something's off here. Let me pull Shadow's complete file and get back to you. And James, watch yourself. If someone falsified military working dog transfer records, that's federal territory." The warning lingered in James's mind as he helped Shadow back inside. By early afternoon, the German Shepherd was resting comfortably when a black SUV pulled into the clinic parking lot. A tall man in his 50s emerged, accompanied by a younger woman James recognized from her voice as Claire Dawson. Dr. Morgan showed them to the private room where James waited with Shadow. Congressman Walker approached immediately, not to James, but to Shadow, kneeling despite his immaculate suit to gently greet the dog. "I had a German Shepherd in my unit in Desert Storm," he explained, carefully offering his hand for Shadow to sniff. "Best explosive detection dog in the theater. Saved my life twice." He looked up at James. "They never forget their training or their partners." James nodded, appreciating the congressman's understanding of the bond between handlers and their dogs. Walker stood, extending his hand to James. "Congressman Robert Walker, this situation is unacceptable, Captain Reeves." "That's putting it mildly, sir," James agreed, shaking the offered hand. For the next hour, James detailed everything, finding Shadow, the microchip information linking him to Meridian, the discrepancies in the official retirement records. Claire Dawson took detailed notes while Walker listened intently, his expression darkening. "This isn't an isolated incident," Walker finally said. "My office has received 3 similar reports in the past year. Retired military working dogs found in shelters or worse, despite records showing proper placement. We've been investigating, but your case provides the first concrete evidence of Meridian's involvement." James frowned. "You think Meridian is systematically acquiring military dogs after retirement?" "We think it's bigger than that," Walker replied grimly. "Meridian holds contracts with multiple federal agencies, including the DoD. They're supposed to train and provide security dogs for government facilities, but training dogs properly is expensive and time-consuming. So they're cutting corners by acquiring already trained military dogs," James concluded, the pieces falling into place. "But that doesn't explain Shadow's condition. Even if they acquired him improperly, he's a valuable asset with years of training. Why would they abandon him?" Walker and Dawson exchanged glances. "That's where things get complicated," Dawson explained. "Based on our investigation, we believe Meridian is running what amounts to a planned obsolescence program with these dogs. They work them beyond reasonable limits, without proper veterinary care or rest periods, maximizing profit until the dogs break down physically or behaviorally. Then they're discarded and replaced with new, retired military dogs." The calculated cruelty of the system hit James like a physical blow. Shadow whimpered softly beside him, as if sensing his handler's distress. "We need evidence," Walker continued. "Hard evidence linking Meridian to systematic abuse and improper acquisition of military working dogs. Your discovery of Shadow is compelling, but to shut this operation down and protect other dogs, we need more." James straightened, a cold determination settling over him. "What exactly are you asking, Congressman?" "We're asking for your help," Walker replied simply. "Your background as a ranger and dog handler makes you uniquely qualified. We need someone to document what's happening at Meridian from the inside, someone who understands military working dogs and can recognize when protocols are being violated." "You want me to infiltrate Meridian?" James stated flatly. Walker nodded. "Through legitimate channels. They're always hiring veterans, especially those with handler experience. We can expedite the application process, get you in within days. You'd be our eyes and ears, gathering evidence legally that can stand up in court." James looked down at Shadow, who gazed back with unwavering trust despite everything he'd suffered. The dog had never abandoned his duty, even when the system had abandoned him. "I'll do it," James decided, "but Shadow stays with me, and his recovery comes first. I won't compromise on that." "Agreed," Walker said. "Dr. Morgan has already consented to serve as our expert witness regarding Shadow's condition. My office will cover all medical expenses through our Veterans Support Foundation." Dr. Morgan nodded confirmation. "I've seen too many cases of animal abuse without consequences. If Shadow's suffering can help prevent others, I'm all in." They spent another hour developing the initial plan. James would apply to Meridian as a security specialist, highlighting his military background but downplaying his handler experience to avoid suspicion. Meanwhile, Walker's office would quietly look into the falsified transfer records. After the congressman departed, James took Shadow for another short walk, the dog moving slightly stronger than before. In the fading afternoon light, James knelt beside his former partner. "I need you to keep fighting, Shadow," he said softly. "We've got another mission, maybe the most important one yet. Those other dogs need us. They need you." Shadow's ears perked forward at the familiar, serious tone, the same tone James had always used before operations. Despite his weakened state, something of the disciplined military dog reawakened in his eyes. He straightened slightly, head tilted attentively. James smiled, seeing the shadow of the partner he remembered. "That's it, boy. We've got work to do." That evening, as Shadow slept peacefully under the influence of medication, James began his preparation. He reviewed everything he knew about Meridian Security Contractors, their public record, contracts, locations. With Congressman Walker's resources supporting him, he now had a mission that felt worthy of his training and experience. For the first time since his medical discharge, James felt the fog of purposelessness lifting completely. He had found Shadow, against impossible odds, but this was just the beginning. Other dogs, other partners like Shadow, were still trapped in a system that used them up and threw them away. The thought of it fueled a cold, focused anger that James recognized from his combat days. Not the kind of anger that clouded judgment, but the kind that honed it to a razor's edge. His phone buzzed with a text from Captain Lawson. "Found something. Shadows. Original retirement papers were overridden by executive order from DoD Contract Division. Authorized by someone named Victor Hayes, Senior Procurement Officer. Never heard of him. Digging deeper. Be careful." James stared at the message for a long moment. An executive override meant high-level involvement, possibly corruption reaching into the Department of Defense itself. This was bigger than one security contractor cutting corners. It suggested a systematic pipeline, diverting military working dogs from proper retirement into private hands. He texted back a brief acknowledgement, then settled into the cot Dr. Morgan had provided beside Shadow's kennel. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of their new mission, one that would require all the skills they had honed in combat, and perhaps new ones they had yet to discover. As he drifted toward sleep, James reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought him to this moment. Finding Shadow had seemed like an endpoint, the miraculous reunion of handler and dog. Now he understood it was actually a beginning. Shadow hadn't just been returned to him, they had been returned to purpose, together. In the quiet of the clinic, with Shadow's steady breathing beside him, James made a silent vow. Whatever corruption had allowed this betrayal would be exposed. Whatever system had failed these loyal dogs would be reformed, no matter the personal cost. He had been trained to complete the mission, and now, finally, he had one worthy of everything he had to give. He glanced once more at Shadow before closing his eyes. "We start tomorrow, partner," he whispered, "just like old times. If you're still with us on this journey, we'd love to know what you think. Has an animal ever changed your life? Share your story in the comments. We're overwhelmed by the support this series has received, and we're determined to reach our goal of 100,000 subscribers to amplify our advocacy for military working dogs. Every subscription helps us spread awareness about these incredible animals who serve alongside our brave men and women in uniform. Now, let's continue with James and Shadow's mission for justice. 1 week after finding Shadow behind the gas station, James stood at the imposing gates of Meridian Security Contractors' training facility. The sprawling compound sat isolated on 100 acres of former farmland, surrounded by dense forest that provided natural privacy. A tall perimeter fence topped with razor wire gave it the appearance of a military installation rather than a private business. James had spent the previous days divided between Shadow's bedside and intense preparation. Dr. Morgan had agreed to keep Shadow at her clinic, providing continuous care while James initiated the first phase of their plan. Though it pained him to leave his partner, even temporarily, James knew this mission required his complete focus. Identification? The security guard at the gate barely glanced at James, his attention fixed on a tablet displaying visitor information. James Reeves. "I have an interview with Mr. Blackwood at 0900. James handed over his driver's license, maintaining the relaxed but alert posture he'd perfected during years of military service. The guard verified his information against the schedule. "Park." In Visitor Lot B, main building, second floor, suite 204. He returned the license along with the visitor badge. Keep this visible at all times. As James drove through the gates, he took careful note of the security measures. Cameras positioned strategically, guards patrolling with trained dogs, access points requiring badge authentication. The facility's security was impressive, though not unexpected for a company handling government contracts. The main building was a modern three-story structure of glass and steel. Inside, the reception area displayed framed government contracts and photographs of Meridian personnel with various officials. James checked in with the receptionist, who directed him to wait in a small conference room. 10 minutes later, the doctor opened to reveal a man in his 50s with a military bearing and the lean physique of someone who prioritized fitness despite his age. He extended his hand with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Richard Blackwood, Director of Operations. You must be James Reeves. James shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and assessing calluses consistent with regular weapons handling. Thank you for seeing me on short notice, sir. Always make time for Rangers, Blackwood replied, taking a seat across from James. Especially those with your record. 2 Bronze Stars, Purple Heart, 5 years with military working dogs including multiple combat deployments. Impressive. James nodded modestly, though inwardly he was surprised. He had deliberately downplayed his handler experience in his application, emphasizing instead his general ranger qualifications. Blackwood apparently had sources providing detailed background information. Tell me, Blackwood continued, why Meridian? Fort Drum must offer better pay and benefits than private sector work. It's not about the money, James replied truthfully. After my injury and medical retirement, returning to active duty in a training capacity felt like a step back. I'm looking for something more, directly impactful. Blackwood studied him with calculating eyes. And your recent emergency leave? Anything we should be concerned about? The question confirmed James's suspicion that Blackwood had access to military personnel records. He'd prepared for this line of inquiry, crafting a response that incorporated enough truth to be convincing. Family emergency, James explained smoothly. My father suffered a heart attack. He's stable now. Blackwood nodded, seemingly satisfied. Our work here is demanding, Reeves. We provide specialized security services to government facilities, private corporations, and high-value individuals. Many of our contracts involve classified operations, requiring absolute discretion and loyalty. Understood, sir. Discretion was a fundamental requirement in special operations. For the next 30 minutes, Blackwood outlined Meridian's operations, emphasizing their government contracts and specialized canine security division. Throughout the conversation, James maintained his cover as an experienced ranger seeking challenging private sector work, while carefully noting details about the facility's canine program. I think you'd be a good fit here, Blackwood finally concluded. We have an opening on our Alpha Response Team, specialized security personnel who deploy with canine units to high-risk locations. The position requires someone with your tactical background and adaptability. He slid a document across the table. Standard NDA and employment contract. Take time to review it, but we'd need your decision by tomorrow. We move quickly here. James accepted the documents. I appreciate the opportunity, sir. One more thing, Blackwood added, his tone casual but his gaze sharp. We value team players at Meridian, people who understand chain of command and don't ask unnecessary questions. Our methods are proprietary, our results unmatched. That requires flexibility from our personnel. The implied warning was clear. James nodded his understanding. In my experience, sir, mission success requires trusting the system and focusing on the objective. Blackwood smiled, apparently pleased with the response. Welcome tour starts at 800 tomorrow, assuming you accept our offer. I think you'll be particularly interested in our canine training division. After the interview, James was escorted back to the reception area. As he walked to his car, he catalogued everything he'd observed: security protocols, facility layout, personnel behaviors. Most concerning was Blackwood's apparent access to detailed military records and his specific interest in James's handler experience, despite its deliberate omission from the application. Once safely away from the compound, James pulled into a State Park rest area and called Congressman Walker's office, connecting immediately to Claire Dawson. "How'd it go?" she asked without preamble. "They offered me a position," James reported. "Alpha Response Team, working with their canine units. Blackwood seemed specifically interested in my handler background, though I didn't emphasize it in my application." "That tracks with our intelligence," Dawson confirmed. "Meridian actively recruits former military dog handlers, though most wash out or leave within 6 months. We suspect they're either discovering the illegal operations or being pushed out when they ask too many questions." "Blackwood has access to detailed military personnel records," James added. "He knew about my emergency leave, specific deployments, everything. That suggests connections inside DoD. Concerning, but not surprising, given what we've uncovered. Victor Hayes, the procurement officer who authorized Shadow's transfer, has financial ties to Meridian through shell companies. We're still mapping the full extent of the corruption." James processed this information grimly. "What's my next step?" "Accept the position," Dawson instructed. "Use tomorrow's tour to gather initial intelligence on their canine operations. We need to understand the scope of their program, how many dogs, conditions, training methods. Congressman Walker has arranged for a secure communication protocol. Details will be messengered to your hotel this evening." After ending the call, James drove directly to Dr. Morgan's clinic. He found Shadow significantly improved. The dog was able to stand and walk short distances unassisted, though still dangerously underweight. "His blood work is showing improvement," Dr. Morgan reported. "The infections are responding to antibiotics, and he's keeping down small amounts of specialized food." James knelt beside Shadow, who pressed against him with quiet affection. "I have to leave again tomorrow, buddy," he explained softly. "But not for long. We're getting closer to answers." That evening in his hotel room, James reviewed the secure communication devices provided by Walker's office. A modified smartphone with encryption capabilities and a seemingly ordinary pen that functioned as a high-resolution camera. The accompanying instructions detailed protocols for documenting evidence and transmitting information securely. As he prepared for the next day's infiltration, James couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Blackwood's specific interest in his handler background suggested Meridian might be aware of his connection to Shadow. If they had access to detailed military records, they could potentially know that Shadow had been his partner. James checked his secured phone, finding a new message from Captain Lawson. Hayes approved transfers of 18 military working dogs to Meridian in the past 24 months, all listed as medical retirement unsuitable for civilian adoption. Something's very wrong here. Be extremely careful. The number stunned James. 18 dogs like Shadow, expertly trained military assets diverted into private hands through falsified records. The scale suggested systematic corruption rather than isolated incidents. James spent hours reviewing the employment contract, noting concerning clauses about proprietary training methods and exclusive rights to all work product, along with unusually strict non-disclosure agreements. By morning, he had memorized the facility layout from satellite images provided by Walker's team and prepared multiple contingency plans. At precisely 0800 the next day, James returned to Meridian. Signed contract in hand, A different security guard escorted him to an administrative building where he completed processing, fingerprinting, badge issuance, and equipment assignment. By 09:30, he was following a stern-faced woman named Regina Torres, Meridian's director of canine operations, toward a separate facility at the rear of the compound. "Blackwood says you have handler experience," Torres remarked as they walked. Her tone was professional but distant. "Some," James replied neutrally. "Mostly patrol and explosive detection work." Torres nodded. "Our program is different from military protocols. More efficient, less constrained by bureaucratic limitations. You'll need to adapt quickly." They approached a long warehouse-like building set apart from the main complex. As Torres badged them through heavy security doors, James was hit by the distinctive sounds and smells of a large canine facility, barking dogs, antiseptic cleaners, and the underlying scent of stress pheromones that any experienced handler would recognize. The interior revealed rows of kennels, housing approximately 30 dogs, primarily German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, and Dutch Shepherds, breeds favored for military and police work. James immediately noted the kennel design, smaller than military standard, with minimal bedding and automated watering systems. More concerning was the dogs' behavior. Many displayed stereotypic movements indicating psychological stress, while others showed hypervigilance or submission responses indicative of aversive training methods. James carefully maintained his neutral expression, though inwardly his anger built with each kennel they passed. These were working dogs, kept in conditions that would violate military welfare standards. He subtly activated the camera pen as Torres led him through the facility, documenting the kennels and their occupants. "Our training philosophy emphasizes rapid deployment readiness," Torres explained as they entered a large indoor training arena where a handler was working with a Malinois on bite work. James immediately noticed the handler's harsh corrections and the dog's stress signals. "Interesting approach," James commented blandly. "Different from what I'm used. Interesting approach," James commented, maintaining his neutral expression, as he watched the harsh training methods. "Different from military protocols." Torres nodded, seemingly pleased by his observation. "Military programs are constrained by public oversight and outdated welfare regulations. Here at Meridian, we've optimized training efficiency. Our dogs deploy faster, perform more consistently, and achieve higher success rates." James noted the euphemistic language, optimized training efficiency instead of harsher methods, higher success rates instead of fear-based compliance. He recognized the terminology from his military experience. Similar phrasing was often used to sanitize questionable tactics. "And what's your washout rate?" he asked casually, knowing that accelerated aversive training typically resulted in higher percentages of dogs deemed unsuitable. A flicker of annoyance crossed Torres's face. "Lower than you might expect. We have certain methods for recalibrating challenging dogs." She led him toward a secured door at the far end of the training arena, badging them through to a separate section. The difference was immediately apparent. This area was quieter, more clinical. Through observation windows, James could see individual training rooms, equipped with what appeared to be modified shock collar systems and restraint apparatus. "Our behavioral modification unit," Torres explained with clinical detachment, "for dogs that resist standard training methods." Through one window, James observed a German Shepherd secured in a restraint system, while a technician administered what appeared to be systematic aversive stimuli. The dog's stress signals were obvious to any experienced handler: dilated pupils, excessive panting, pinned ears. James forced himself to maintain professional composure while his camera pen captured the evidence. "Impressive setup," he managed, disguising his disgust as professional interest. "How long does recalibration typically take?" depends on the dog's resistance level. Some turn around in days, others take weeks. The particularly stubborn ones. She paused. Well, we have a limited tolerance for wasted resources. The implication was clear, and James felt cold fury building within him. These weren't just unethical training methods. This was systematic abuse designed to break animals psychologically. As they continued the tour, James noted that many of the dogs bore distinctive scars or movement patterns he recognized from military working dogs, subtle indicators differentiating them from commercially bred and trained animals. His suspicions were strengthened when they passed a kennel housing a Malinois with a distinctive scar pattern on its flank that matched descriptions of a dog reported missing from retirement 6 months earlier, according to Walker's briefing. Materials. That one, James said, gesturing toward the Malinois. Impressive specimen. Where do you source dogs of that quality? Torres's response was carefully measured. Various channels. Some are purpose-bred, others come through specialized acquisition programs. She checked her watch. We should continue to the deployment center. Your team assignment will begin tomorrow, so you'll need to understand operational protocols. As they moved toward another building, James spotted something that nearly broke. His careful composure. A German shepherd in an isolation kennel at the far end of the corridor that bore striking resemblance to a dog he'd worked with during his final deployment. The dog, codenamed Maverick, had been handled by another ranger who'd been killed in action. According to official records, Maverick had been retired with honors and placed with his handler's family. James carefully filed away the location of the kennel for later investigation. If Maverick was indeed here, it would provide further evidence of systematic diversion of military dogs. The remainder of the tour covered Meridian's operational procedures, deployment protocols, equipment standards, and team structures. Throughout, James maintained his cover as an interested new hire while documenting everything possible with his concealed camera. By late afternoon, the orientation concluded with James receiving his official schedule. He would begin training with Alpha Team at 0600 the following day. Any questions before you start tomorrow? Torres asked as they returned to the administrative building. Just one, James replied. I noticed your methods achieve remarkable control. But what about handler bonding? Military protocols emphasize the partnership aspect. Torres's expression revealed subtle disdain. That's another military inefficiency. Emotional attachment creates vulnerabilities. Our dogs operate from discipline, not devotion. They perform for any qualified handler, eliminating the dependency, issues that plague military teams when handlers are injured or reassigned. The philosophy was the antithesis of everything James had learned and experienced with Shadow and other military working dogs. The bond between handler and dog wasn't just emotional. It created intuitive communication and trust that enhanced operational effectiveness. Meridian's approach treated the dogs as equipment rather than partners. Makes sense from an efficiency standpoint, James responded neutrally, though the words tasted bitter. After completing final paperwork, James left the compound and drove directly to a predetermined secure location, a cabin owned by a trusted associate of Congressman Walker. There, he transmitted the day's documentation through encrypted channels and provided a detailed verbal report. This is worse than we anticipated, Claire Dawson responded after reviewing his initial findings. The facility houses approximately 30 dogs, many showing physical and behavioral indicators consistent with military working dogs diverted from retirement. Their training methods violate every ethical standard in the industry. At least 6 dogs I observed today match descriptions of MWDs reported missing or falsely classified as medically retired, James confirmed. I need access to their records. System to document the connection conclusively. We're working on that, Dawson assured him. Our technical team is developing a solution that should give you limited access. In the meantime, continue gathering visual evidence and identifying as many dogs as possible. After the debriefing, James drove directly to Dr. Morgan's clinic, arriving after hours. She had agreed to keep the facility open for his visits, understanding the sensitivity of the operation. He found Shadow significantly improved. The dog was able to walk the length of the clinic without assistance, and his coat was beginning to regain some of its former luster. Dr. Morgan had established a careful refeeding protocol to address his malnutrition without overwhelming his compromised system. "He asked about you today," Dr. Morgan said with a smile as Shadow greeted James enthusiastically, his tail wagging with more strength than before. "Asked about me?" James raised an eyebrow as he knelt to embrace his former partner. "In his way," she explained. "He kept going to the door, looking out, then coming back to me with this expression. You know, the one dogs get when they're trying to figure out where their person is. When he heard your car pull up, he knew immediately. His hearing is remarkably sharp despite everything." James spent an hour with Shadow, quietly recounting what he'd seen at Meridian, while the dog listened with the attentive focus that had always characterized their partnership. Though Shadow couldn't understand the words, the familiar routine of mission debriefing seemed to comfort both of them. "I saw things today that would make you growl, buddy," James said softly, stroking Shadow's ears. "Dogs like you being treated as disposable tools. But we're going to change that. We're going to make it right." As James prepared to leave for the night, Dr. Morgan pulled him aside with a concerned expression. "There's something you should know," she said quietly. "A man came by the clinic today asking questions about Shadow, said he was from Animal Control following up on the gas station report, but his ID looked off, wrong formatting for county credentials." James felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. "What did you tell him?" "That Shadow had been claimed by his owner and transferred to a specialty veterinary hospital in Pittsburgh," she replied. "I didn't like his questions, too specific. About you, not enough about the dog's welfare. I've worked with Animal Control for 15 years. This wasn't standard procedure." The implications were clear. Meridian was investigating Shadow's discovery and James's connection to it. Perhaps his cover was already compromised. "Good instincts," James commended her. "We need to move Shadow tonight. It's not safe here anymore." Within an hour, they had loaded Shadow into Dr. Morgan's personal vehicle, a modified SUV she used for farm calls. James followed on a predetermined route to a small farm outside town owned by Dr. Morgan's brother, a retired veterinary technician, who had agreed to provide secure accommodations for Shadow during the investigation. The farmhouse sat well back from the road, surrounded by fields that would make covert approach difficult. Shadow seemed to approve of the arrangement, investigating his new surroundings with growing confidence despite his still weakened condition. "He'll be safe here," Dr. Morgan assured James. "My brother lives alone, rarely has visitors, and the property has good sightlines in all directions. Plus, he's an excellent caretaker who understands Shadow's special needs." James knelt beside Shadow, looking directly into the intelligent eyes that had watched over him through countless dangerous situations. "I have to go back in there tomorrow," he explained, as if the dog could understand, "but I'll return as soon as possible. This is just temporary, I promise." Shadow pressed his head against James's chest in a gesture so familiar it created a physical ache. Despite their years apart, the connection remained unbroken. That night, as James prepared for his first official day at Meridian, he received another encrypted message from Captain Lawson. Cross-referenced DoD transfer records with VA claims. 18 MWDs transferred to Meridian were simultaneously listed as deceased in VA benefits system, meaning no ongoing medical coverage. Double fraud, sending full documentation through Walker's channels. Evidence suggests higher-level involvement than just haze. Watch yourself. The message confirmed what James had suspected. The corruption extended beyond a single procurement officer into broader, systematic fraud. Military working dogs were being fraudulently classified as deceased to terminate their veteran benefits, while simultaneously being transferred to Meridian for continued exploitation. James reviewed his preparations for the next day, knowing the stakes had escalated. Meridian was potentially aware of his connection to Shadow, and his investigation now threatened to expose corruption reaching into higher levels of the Department of Defense. The danger was significant, but so was the opportunity to bring justice for Shadow and countless other dogs betrayed by the system meant to protect them. As he finally settled into restless sleep, James's resolve hardened. Tomorrow would bring him deeper into Meridian's operations and closer to the evidence needed to shut them down permanently. For Shadow, for Maverick, for all the dogs who had served faithfully only to be betrayed, he would see this mission through, no matter the personal risk. The path ahead was dangerous, but James felt a clarity of purpose he hadn't experienced since his active duty days. Finding Shadow hadn't just reunited him with his former partner, it had given him a mission worthy of the skills and determination that had defined his military career. This wasn't just about one dog anymore. It was about honoring a sacred obligation to those who served without question or hesitation. We're amazed by your support and comments on this journey. Your stories about the special bonds with animals in your lives have truly touched our hearts. If you're finding value in Shadow and James's story, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We're getting closer to our goal of 100,000 subscribers to amplify our advocacy for military working dogs. Now let's continue following James as he ventures deeper into Meridian's operations. Dawn had barely broken when James arrived at Meridian's compound for his first official day. The facility looked different in the early morning light, more industrial, less polished than during his orientation tour. Security personnel moved with heightened alertness at shift change, and James noted additional patrols that hadn't been present the previous day. At the security checkpoint, a stern-faced guard scrutinized his credentials longer than necessary before reluctantly waving him through. The subtle hostility confirmed James's suspicion that his cover might be compromised, or at least under heightened scrutiny. The Alpha team assembled in a briefing room adjacent to the kennel facility. 6 operators with backgrounds similar to James's, all former military or law enforcement. Their team leader, Marcus Winters, was a compact, hard-eyed former Marine with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. "Our new addition," Winters announced without enthusiasm as James entered. "James Reeves, former Army Ranger dog handler experience. He'll observe today, integrate into operations tomorrow." His tone made clear that James would need to prove himself before being fully accepted. The team briefing outlined their current assignment, providing security for a government research facility that had received threats from environmental activists. James listened attentively while assessing his new teammates. Most displayed the hypervigilant, tightly wound demeanor common to private security contractors, but one, a lanky former Army specialist named Taylor, showed subtle signs of discomfort. During discussions of Meridian's canine deployment protocols, after the briefing, the team moved to the kennel area for dog assignments. Winters approached a handler supervisor, pointedly ignoring James. "We need high-alert dogs today," he instructed. "Research facility has multiple approaches through wooded terrain. Bring out the top performers." The supervisor nodded and disappeared into the kennel area, returning minutes later with 5 handlers leading German Shepherds and Malinois, straining against their leads. The dogs showed concerning behavioral indicators: hyper-focused attention, excessive muscle tension, stress panting despite the cool morning. James recognized the signs of dogs worked to their psychological limits, their natural drives pushed into unhealthy hyperarousal. "These aren't stable working dogs," James observed quietly to Taylor, who had positioned himself nearby. "They're overstimulated, stress indicators everywhere." Taylor glanced at him sharply. "Keep observations like that to yourself if you want to last here," he muttered. "Meridian calls it peak performance state. The rest of us call it don't. Make sudden movements around them." James noted Taylor's obvious discomfort with Meridian's methods, filing away the potential ally for future reference. As the team prepared for deployment, Winters approached James with a challenging expression. "You'll ride with me today, Reeves. Observation only. Keep your hands off the dogs, unless instructed otherwise." The drive to the research facility took 40 minutes, during which Winters subjected James to what was clearly an assessment disguised as casual conversation. Probing questions about his military experience, handler background, and personal perspectives on security methodologies. James provided carefully calibrated responses, revealing enough authentic detail to seem cooperative while avoiding anything that might further compromise his cover. "One thing I'm curious about," Winters said as they approached the facility. "Your personnel file mentions you worked with a dog named Shadow during your final deployment. Distinguished service record on that animal." The direct reference to Shadow sent a jolt of adrenaline through James's system, though he maintained his neutral expression. "That's right. Excellent working dog. Lost track of him after my medical discharge." Winters watched him with calculating eyes. "Interesting coincidence. We processed a German Shepherd with the same name about 2 years ago. Military transfer, if I recall correctly." The statement confirmed what James had suspected. Meridian knew exactly who Shadow was and was testing James's reaction to determine his awareness and intentions. The calculated approach suggested they didn't yet have conclusive evidence of his investigation, only suspicions. "Common name for a black shepherd," James replied with deliberate casualness. "Military naming conventions aren't particularly creative. My Shadow was probably one of dozens with the same designation." Winters held his gaze for a beat too long before nodding. "Probably. Still, might be worth checking our records. Reuniting handlers with their former partners makes for good PR occasionally." The implied threat was clear. Meridian was investigating the connection and using it to assess James's true purpose at the facility. His cover wasn't blown yet, but it was fraying at the edges. The day's deployment proceeded without incident, though James noted multiple concerning practices in Meridian's handling protocols. The dogs were worked for excessive periods without adequate rest. Handlers used unnecessarily harsh corrections, and behavioral stress signals were routinely ignored. James documented everything discreetly while maintaining his observer role. Taylor, the team member who had shown discomfort earlier, positioned himself near James during a perimeter check, speaking in low tones while pretending to adjust his equipment. "You asking questions about the dogs?" he murmured, eyes scanning the surroundings. "Be careful. Last guy who showed too much interest in canine protocols disappeared from the roster overnight. No explanation." Before James could respond, Winters appeared nearby, and Taylor moved away with practiced nonchalance. The brief exchange confirmed James's suspicion that others within Meridian had noticed the ethical issues but feared repercussions for speaking out. By day's end, James had gathered substantial documentation of Meridian's operational violations, excessive work periods, inadequate water access, and handlers using prohibited control techniques. While valuable, this evidence documented only policy violations, not the criminal fraud and abuse at the heart of the investigation. As the team returned to the Meridian compound, Blackwood intercepted them in the parking area, his attention fixed immediately on James. "Reeves, a word before you leave." It wasn't a request. James followed Blackwood to his office, mentally reviewing contingency plans if his cover had been fully compromised. The office was meticulously organized, with military precision that reflected Blackwood's background. He gestured for James to sit, then activated a white noise generator on his desk, a concerning indication that he expected this conversation to remain completely private. "First impressions of our operation?" Blackwood asked, studying James's face with unsettling intensity. "Impressive efficiency," James replied carefully. "Different protocols than I'm accustomed to, but effective results." Blackwood nodded, slightly. Military working dog programs are constrained by public relations concerns and outdated welfare regulations. Here, we optimize for performance, not perception. He leaned forward. "But that's not what I wanted to discuss." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a photograph of James entering Dr. Morgan's veterinary clinic the previous evening. "Care to explain your interest in a rural veterinary practice?" Blackwood's tone remained conversational, but his eyes had hardened. James had anticipated this possibility and prepared accordingly. "Personal matter. Friend's hunting dog was injured. Dr. Morgan was recommended as the best large animal vet in the area." "Interesting," Blackwood replied. "Because our security team received an alert about a stray German shepherd found near one of our former training locations. Dog was reportedly taken to that same clinic." He tapped the photograph. "Coincidence, Reeves?" The moment had come, sooner than James had expected. His cover story was unraveling, forcing him to adapt quickly. Rather than deny the connection, he opted for a partial truth that might buy critical time. "Not entirely," he admitted, watching Blackwood's expression carefully. "When I heard about a shepherd at a local clinic, I was curious. I lost track of my former partner after medical discharge. Thought there might be a slim chance." He shrugged. "Wasn't him, different markings, wrong age. Disappointed but not surprised." Blackwood studied him silently, assessing the explanation. "Loyalty to former partners is understandable. Admirable even. But at Meridian, your loyalty belongs to the team and the mission. Personal attachments are discouraged." "Understood," James replied. "Won't happen again." After a tense moment, Blackwood nodded, apparently accepting the explanation for now. "I'm accelerating your integration timeline. Starting tomorrow, you'll begin handler certification with our specialized response division. Torres thinks your experience might be particularly valuable with some of our challenging cases." The assignment was both an opportunity and a trap, providing access to more restricted areas while placing James under closer supervision. Blackwood was positioning him where his reactions to Meridian's methods could be more carefully monitored. "Looking forward to it," James replied with appropriate professional enthusiasm. "One more thing," Blackwood added as James stood to leave. "We value team players at Meridian, people who understand operational security and chain of command. Should you have concerns about our methods, I expect those to come directly to me, not to outside parties. Clarity on this point is essential for your continued employment." The warning was unmistakable. Blackwood suspected something, but lacked definitive proof. James was being offered a chance to fall in line or face consequences. "Crystal clear, sir," James responded. "Chain of command was drilled into me from day one in the Rangers." After leaving Blackwood's office, James drove directly to the secure meeting location, taking an intentionally circuitous route and employing counter-surveillance techniques to ensure he wasn't followed. The encounter with Blackwood had raised the stakes significantly. His window for gathering conclusive evidence was closing rapidly. Claire Dawson and a technical specialist from Walker's team were waiting at the cabin, reviewing the day's documentation. "Blackwood knows," James reported without preamble. "He hasn't confirmed my connection to Shadow, but he's suspicious enough to be testing me. Security is watching the veterinary clinic. Shadow's been moved to a secure location, but we need to accelerate the timeline." Dawson frowned. we still lack definitive evidence linking Meridian to the fraudulent transfers. Without that, we can prove animal welfare violations, but not the systematic corruption that's at the heart of this. Blackwood's assigned me to handler certification starting tomorrow, James explained. That should give me access to their internal canine tracking system. If I can document the military identification numbers of the dogs in their possession and cross-reference with the fraudulent transfer records, we'll have what we need. The technical specialist, introduced only as Chen, handed James what appeared to be a standard smartphone. This looks identical to your current device, but contains advanced extraction software. If you can connect to their network for even 30 seconds, it will duplicate access credentials and allow us remote entry to their systems. They spent the next hour refining the plan and reviewing extraction protocols should James's cover be fully compromised. The risks were escalating, but so was the potential reward: access to documentation that could expose the entire operation. After the briefing, James drove to the farm where Shadow was now housed. He found his former partner significantly improved, moving with growing confidence around the fenced yard under the watchful eye of Dr. Morgan's brother, Frank. "He's gaining strength daily," Frank reported, watching Shadow investigate the perimeter of the property, a security sweep pattern ingrained. From his military training, ate his full meal portion today. Dr. Morgan's nutrition plan is working. James knelt as Shadow trotted over to greet him, the dog's tail wagging with genuine enthusiasm, despite his still gaunt frame. The transformation from the starving, defeated animal he'd found behind the gas station was remarkable, a testament to Shadow's resilience and fighting spirit. "We're close, buddy," James murmured, running his hands over Shadow's coat, checking his improving condition with practiced efficiency. "But things might get complicated tomorrow, if I don't make it back on schedule." He trailed off, unwilling, to voice the possibility that his cover might be blown with severe consequences. Frank nodded in understanding. "We have the contingency plan in place. If you miss 2 consecutive check-ins, we initiate Protocol Echo through the Congressman's office. Shadow will be transferred to the secure location in West Virginia, and your evidence will be turned over to federal authorities." James appreciated the older man's calm professionalism. As a former veterinary technician with military experience, Frank understood both Shadow's specialized needs and the seriousness of the operation. That night, James spent hours reviewing facility maps and security protocols, preparing for all contingencies. Tomorrow would likely be his last opportunity to gather the evidence needed to expose Meridian's operation. If successful, they could shut down a system that had betrayed countless military working dogs. If he failed, best-case scenario was a blown operation. Worst case was considerably darker given what he knew about Meridian's methods and the high-level corruption they were concealing. As he finally prepared for a few hours of sleep, James checked on the secure phone provided by Congressman Walker's team. A new message from Captain Lawson had arrived. Documents confirm Shadow officially listed as deceased in VA system 17 months ago. Death certificate signed by veterinarian who doesn't exist. Someone collected benefits provisions for service-connected euthanasia while simultaneously transferring him to Meridian. Multiple signatures on falsified documents traced to Hayes and 2 other DoD officials. This goes higher than we thought. Federal authorities being briefed tomorrow. Extraction team on standby. The message confirmed what they had suspected. Shadow's transfer to Meridian was part of a coordinated fraud scheme involving multiple government officials. The service-connected euthanasia designation was particularly telling. It triggered the highest level of handler benefits and financial compensation, designed to provide closure and support for handlers losing partners to service-related injuries. Those funds had been diverted while Shadow was transferred to Meridian for continued exploitation. James closed his eyes, anger and determination crystallizing into a cold, focused resolve. Tomorrow would bring him face to face with the specialized division that had likely processed Shadow and countless other military dogs. He would find the evidence needed to expose the entire operation, no matter the personal risk. For Shadow, for all the dogs betrayed by those sworn to protect them, he would complete this final mission. The morning arrived with a heavy fog shrouding Meridian's compound, reducing visibility to mere yards and casting an ethereal quality over the security perimeter. James arrived early, using the weather conditions to conduct a more thorough assessment of the facility's layout without drawing attention. The reduced visibility provided opportunities to document security blind spots and potential extraction routes should his cover be compromised. At precisely 0600, James reported to the Specialized Training Division, a separate building he hadn't accessed during previous days. The structure stood apart from the main kennel facility, surrounded by its own security fence and requiring elevated clearance for entry. The guard at the checkpoint scrutinized James's credentials with particular attention before reluctantly granting access. "New handler certification program?" the guard confirmed, his tone suggesting this was unusual. "Direct assignment from Blackwood," James replied with casual confidence. The guard's expression shifted slightly, surprise mingled with something like concern, before he buzzed James through. Inside, the facility presented a stark contrast to the main kennel area. Where the primary building housed rows of standard kennels, this structure contained individual enclosures with reinforced doors and sophisticated monitoring systems. Each unit displayed digital readouts, tracking biometric data and behavioral metrics. The entire operation resembled a high-security research laboratory more than a training facility. Torres waited in a central monitoring station, surrounded by screens displaying feeds from each enclosure. She acknowledged James with a curt nod. "Blackwood accelerated your integration timeline. Unusual, but he sees potential in your background." Her tone suggested skepticism rather than endorsement. "Our specialized division handles exceptional cases, dogs with unique capabilities, or challenging behavioral profiles." James maintained his professional demeanor while scanning the monitoring systems, identifying approximately 20 enclosures, each housing a single dog. The screens displayed vital signs, activity levels, and behavioral assessment scores, quantifying each animal's performance with clinical precision. "Impressive monitoring," he observed neutrally, "different from standard military protocols." Torres allowed a hint of pride to break through her otherwise guarded expression. "Military programs waste potential by prioritizing handler bonding over performance optimization. Our methods extract maximum capability regardless of handler variables." She led him to a secure workstation where a technician waited with what appeared to be a specialized tablet. "Your biometric profile has been loaded into our handler authentication system," Torres explained. "This device syncs with the specialized collars our advanced assets wear. It allows precise control of stimulus parameters based on real-time behavioral data." The technician demonstrated the system, showing how the tablet interface could remotely adjust various correction parameters with disturbing precision. James recognized the technology as a military prototype that had been rejected for ethical concerns, a sophisticated, aversive control system that had been deemed psychologically damaging to working dogs. The military abandoned this technology, James noted carefully, testing Torres's response. She smiled thinly. "One of many innovations deemed too advanced for conventional programs. Here, we embrace methods that achieve results." She gestured toward an adjacent training arena. "You'll observe a calibration session first, then conduct a preliminary assessment with Asset 17. The terminology, asset rather than dog, reinforced the dehumanized approach Meridian applied to their canine teams. James followed Torres to an observation area overlooking a sterile training room where a handler was working with a Belgian Malinois. The dog moved with military precision, but displayed concerning stress indicators, hypervigilance, tension patterns in muscle groups, and subtle displacement behaviors between tasks. Through a control panel, Torres activated an audio feed, allowing James to hear the handler's commands. The training session focused on detection work, with the handler using the tablet to deliver what Torres described as precision reinforcement. When the dog hesitated, James recognized the euphemism for what it actually was: remote-administered aversive stimuli calibrated to the dog's stress threshold. This particular asset came to us through our military acquisition program, Torres explained, consulting a digital file. Former explosive detection specialist, 3 combat deployments. Initial integration required extensive recalibration to eliminate handler dependency and emotional response patterns. James maintained his professional mask while inwardly noting every detail. The dog's movements, scars, and distinctive white chest marking match the description of a military working dog named Ranger, who had been reported medically retired 14 months earlier. According to Congressman Walker's files, Ranger's handler had attempted to adopt him, but was told the dog had been euthanized due to severe PTSD symptoms, making him unsuitable for civilian life. The reality playing out before James told a very different story. Ranger was very much alive, working at performance levels that would be impossible for a dog genuinely suffering from debilitating PTSD. The diagnosis had clearly been falsified to facilitate his transfer to Meridian while denying his handler adoption rights. Impressive capabilities, James commented, careful to show appropriate professional interest while concealing his growing rage. How long does integration typically take for military acquisitions? Torres consulted the file again. This asset required 6 weeks of intensive recalibration. Above average, but the investment has proven worthwhile. His detection accuracy exceeds military performance metrics by 37%. The session concluded, and the handler led Ranger, now designated Asset 12, back to his enclosure. James noted the dog's movement patterns showed subtle indicators of physical strain and psychological stress that Torres either didn't recognize or deliberately ignored. Now for your preliminary assessment, Torres announced, leading James to another section of the facility. Asset 17 arrived 3 days ago. Military transfer, advanced age but exceptional service record, showing resistance to standard integration protocols. Torres sounded impressed despite herself. Remarkable. He's rejected all integration attempts for 3 days. James spent the next 20 minutes demonstrating what he described as military reintegration protocols, but were actually standard trust-building exercises used by handlers. Throughout, he maintained the pretense of professional assessment while actually evaluating Maverick's condition and covertly documenting everything via the camera pen. The specialized phone, meanwhile, had completed its network infiltration, capturing the access credentials needed for Chen to remotely access Meridian systems. When James finally exited the enclosure, the device had collected far more than they had hoped, complete database structures and preliminary file indices that would guide their evidence gathering. Promising initial response, Torres acknowledged. As they left Maverick's enclosure, your military experience provides valuable insight into these resistant cases. Happy to help, James replied with practiced professionalism. Military dogs have specialized conditioning that requires specific deconditioning approaches. With your permission, I'd like to review his complete acquisition file and performance data. Understanding his military training patterns could accelerate the integration process. The request was calculated to gain access to exactly the documentation they needed, the fraudulent transfer records that would prove Meridian's criminal acquisition of Maverick and other military dogs. Torres considered briefly before nodding. Blackwood authorized full access for your assessment. Use Workstation 7 in the data center. All acquisition files are accessible through the asset management system. She checked her watch. I have a meeting with our government liaison team. Report your findings directly to me by end of day. The opportunity was better than James had anticipated. Alone in the data center, he would have direct access to Meridian's complete records without immediate supervision. As Torres left to attend her meeting, James connected with Chen through a concealed communication device disguised as a hearing aid. I'm heading to their data center with authorized access, he murmured once Torres was out of earshot. Stand by for mass data extraction. Connection established, Chen confirmed in his ear. We're already accessing preliminary systems through your phone's infiltration. Full extraction capability standing by. As James made his way to the data center, he passed the enclosure holding Maverick, now alert and watching the corridor with renewed awareness. The veteran dog's gaze met his briefly, a moment of connection between two warriors who understood their duty. James nodded slightly, a silent promise to the dog who had served so faithfully. Maverick's discovery had provided compelling evidence of Meridian's criminal enterprise, strengthening their case beyond what finding Shadow alone could have accomplished. More importantly, it confirmed that other military working dogs remained trapped in Meridian's system, waiting for justice and redemption. The path ahead was clear now, the mission parameters defined with renewed clarity. James would access the records, extract the evidence, and complete the documentation needed to bring down Meridian's entire operation. For Shadow, for Maverick, for every dog betrayed by the system meant to honor their service, he would see this through to completion. The stakes had never been higher, but neither had his resolve. Some missions transcended personal risk, becoming a matter of sacred duty. This was one of those missions, and James would not fail. If you're still with us on this journey, we'd love to hear what aspects of James and Shadow's story have resonated with you most. The bond between handlers and their service dogs represents one of the purest forms of loyalty and partnership. Please consider subscribing to help us reach our goal of 100,000 subscribers. Together, we can amplify awareness about the challenges facing retired military working dogs and advocate for better protection systems. Now let's continue with this crucial turning point in our story. The data center hummed with the quiet efficiency of high-performance computing systems. Rows of servers and workstations filled the climate-controlled room, each dedicated to different aspects of Meridian's operations. James located Workstation 7, positioned fortuitously in a corner with limited visibility from other stations, and logged in using the credentials Torres had authorized. The asset management system required biometric authentication, prompting James to place his palm on a scanner built into the desk. After a moment's verification, the system granted access to restricted databases containing complete records on every dog in Meridian's possession. I'm in, James murmured into his concealed communication device, accessing acquisition records now. Receiving data stream, Chen confirmed in his ear. Preliminary file structures indicate comprehensive documentation. Keep the connection active as long as possible. James navigated to the military acquisition program files, discovering a systematic database of every working dog Meridian had obtained through their Department of Defense connections. The records were meticulously organized, including original military identification numbers, service histories, and, most damning, the falsified medical retirement documents used to justify their transfer. He accessed Maverick's file first, confirming what he had suspected. The distinguished military working dog had been fraudulently classified as psychologically unsuitable for civilian placement, despite evaluation reports from military veterinarians recommending him for retirement with his handler's family. The documentation included communications between Victor Hayes, the DoD procurement officer, and Richard Blackwood, explicitly discussing the value of acquiring a dog with Maverick's extensive training without the encumbrance of adoption rights. Most disturbing was a section titled Acquisition Depreciation Timeline, which calculated the expected service period before each dog would become non-viable due to physical breakdown or psychological resistance to Meridian's methods. Maverick's file included a notation: asset approaching terminal resistance threshold, recommended for field decommission within 30 days if integration protocols remain unsuccessful. The clinical euphemism couldn't disguise the horrifying implication. Dogs who couldn't be broken to Meridian's methods were eventually decommissioned rather than rehabilitated or retired. This explained Shadow's condition when James found him. He had likely been abandoned after being deemed non-viable, following resistance to Meridian's integration protocols. "Are you seeing this?" James asked Chen, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Every byte," Chen confirmed. "We're capturing the complete database structure and contents. This is exactly what we needed: systemic documentation of fraud, animal cruelty, and conspiracy involving government officials." James navigated deeper into the system, locating Shadow's file. The records confirmed everything they had pieced together. Shadow had been transferred to Meridian 2 years earlier through the same fraudulent process used for Maverick and at least 30 other military working dogs. His file included a notation: persistent handler attachment behaviors resistant to recalibration. Elevated correction protocols authorized. The clinical language disguised what must have been weeks of escalating abuse attempting to break Shadow's loyalty and training. Another notation, dated 3 months earlier, read, asset designated non-viable after failed final recalibration attempt, scheduled for field decommission. Below this was a decommission verification form bearing the signature of a Meridian field supervisor. The document indicated Shadow had been disposed of at a designated location, matching the coordinates of the gas station where James had found him. The form included photographs of Shadow chained to the dumpster, documenting his abandonment as casually as one might document the disposal of damaged equipment. The calculated cruelty staggered James. Shadow hadn't simply been abandoned. His desertion had been documented as part of Meridian's standard operating procedure for non-viable assets. The discovery transformed his already resolute determination into something harder and more focused, a cold certainty that this system would be dismantled, no matter the cost. "I've found Shadow's decommission records," James reported to Chen. "They documented his abandonment. This wasn't a rogue employee, it's standard procedure." "We're capturing everything," Chen assured him. "The extraction is at 60%. We need approximately 7 more minutes for complete database acquisition." James continued navigating through the files, documenting the full scope of Meridian's operation. The records revealed a systematic pipeline. Military working dogs were identified for acquisition based on their training value. Falsified medical or behavioral issues were created to prevent handler adoption, and fabricated euthanasia records were submitted to terminate VA benefits while the dogs were transferred to Meridian for continued exploitation. Most alarming was evidence of the operation's scale. Over a 3-year period, Meridian had acquired 74 military working dogs through their fraudulent pipeline. Of these, 22 had already been decommissioned after being deemed non-viable. The remaining dogs were in various stages of Meridian's integration process, their lives reduced to performance metrics and asset valuations. The financial records were equally damning, showing payments to DoD officials, including Victor Hayes, and two others for consultation services that aligned precisely with dog transfer dates. The corruption extended beyond Meridian into the government, oversight systems meant to protect these animals. As James documented the evidence, a notification appeared on his screen. System security alert. Unauthorized data extraction detected. Simultaneously, Chen's voice urgently came through his earpiece. They've detected the extraction. You have. Approximately 3 minutes before security protocols, isolate that workstation. Get what you need and prepare for extraction. James worked rapidly, focusing on the most critical documentation, the direct communications between Meridian executives and DoD officials, the financial transactions proving corruption, and the systemic protocols for decommissioning dogs. Deemed non-viable, the evidence formed an irrefutable chain, documenting criminal conspiracy, fraud, animal cruelty, and corruption at multiple levels. As he completed the targeted extraction, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. James knew his cover was blown. Security systems had identified the unauthorized data access and would soon lock down the entire compound. Extraction compromised, he reported tersely to Chen, initiating contingency plan Delta. Understood, Chen responded. Extraction team is mobilizing. Rendezvous at checkpoint 3 in 15 minutes. We've captured approximately 85% of the database, more than enough for federal prosecution. James logged out of the system and moved purposefully toward the exit, maintaining a calm demeanor despite the alarms. He knew the facility's security protocols would initially focus on securing the data systems rather than personnel. Standard procedure would assume a remote hacking attempt before suspecting an internal breach. This assessment proved accurate as security personnel rushed past him toward the server rooms, barely glancing at James as he moved confidently through the corridors. His military bearing and Meridian credentials still provided a temporary shield, but it wouldn't last once they traced the breach to his workstation. James had a decision to make: head directly to the extraction point or attempt to reach Maverick first. The second option carried significantly higher risk, but aligned with his fundamental mission to rescue exploited military working dogs. He couldn't leave a dog who had served so honorably behind to face Meridian's retribution. Slight change of plan, he informed Chen, turning toward the specialized training division. I'm retrieving Asset 17 before extraction. That's not in the protocol, Chen objected. Increased risk of... Not negotiable, James interrupted. He's coming with me. The specialized training division was already on heightened alert when James arrived, but his handler credentials still granted him access. Moving with purposeful authority, he approached the monitoring station where a single technician was attempting to implement security protocols. Blackwood sent me to secure the high-value assets, James stated, with commanding urgency. Priority on Asset 17, potential flight risk with his military background. The technician hesitated only briefly before nodding, too junior to question. What appeared to be a security directive from leadership, he unlocked Maverick's enclosure remotely, allowing James to enter unchallenged. Maverick was alert, sensing the facility's heightened tension. When James entered, the veteran dog recognized him immediately, rising with renewed energy despite his age and condition. "We're leaving, partner," James told him quietly, removing the specialized collar Meridian had fitted and replacing it with a standard lead. She stopped outside an enclosure, displaying warning indicators on its monitoring system. Through the observation window, James saw a German shepherd lying in the corner, facing away from the door. The dog's posture conveyed what any experienced handler would recognize as passive resistance, not aggression, but a stubborn refusal to engage with the training system. "Maverick!" James breathed involuntarily, recognizing the distinctive markings on the dog's back haunches. Torres glanced at him sharply. "You're familiar with this asset?" James recovered quickly. "The markings match a dog from my former unit. Staff Sergeant Miller's partner. I thought he'd been retired to Miller's family after their last deployment. Military records indicated medical regression making civilian placement unsuitable," Torres replied, studying James's reaction. "We acquired him through standard channels. His former designation was indeed Maverick, though we've removed that conditioning as part of integration." The confirmation hit James like a physical blow. Maverick had been Miller's partner for 4 years. After Miller was killed in action during their final deployment, Maverick had completed the mission by leading the remaining team to safety. The dog had attended Miller's funeral, walking alongside the casket with such dignified grief that the image had been featured in military publications. Miller's family had been promised Maverick would come to live with them after processing out of the service, a promise clearly broken for Meridian's profit. "His resistance profile is unusual," Torres continued, unaware of the significance of her revelation. "He's not responding to standard recalibration protocols. Blackwood thought your familiarity with military training might provide insight into more effective integration methods." James studied the monitoring data, noting with grim satisfaction that Maverick's compliance scores were among the lowest in the facility. Even at his advanced age and under duress, the veteran working dog was refusing to surrender his training and dignity to Meridian's methods. "May I enter the enclosure?" James asked. Torres hesitated. "Asset 17 has shown aggression toward integration. Specialists, our standard protocol would be to continue mechanical recalibration before attempting direct handler interaction. Military working dogs respond to familiarity," James explained, playing to Meridian's desire for efficient results. "If he recognizes me from his former unit, it might accelerate the integration process." After a moment's consideration, Torres nodded. "Use extreme caution. The tablet is pre-programmed with escalating correction protocols if needed." She handed him the control device, which James accepted while making a show of familiarizing himself with the interface. In reality, he had no intention of using the aversive system on Maverick or any dog. As Torres unlocked the enclosure, James palmed the specialized phone provided by Chen, activating its data extraction program. The moment he entered the secure area, the device began silently capturing network credentials and accessing Meridian's internal systems. Maverick remained in his corner as James entered, his posture rigid with tension. He was thinner than James, remembered, with new scars visible on his flanks, but the intelligent eyes that turned to assess the newcomer remained sharp and alert. "Approach cautiously," Torres advised through an intercom. "Establish dominance immediately if he shows resistance." James ignored the instruction, instead moving to the center of the enclosure and kneeling with his back half-turned to Maverick, a position of trust rather than dominance. He recalled Miller's unique greeting ritual with his partner, a quiet whistle pattern followed by their unit's unofficial motto. Softly, barely audible to the monitoring systems, James whistled the distinctive 3-note pattern Miller had always used, then murmured, "Strength through loyalty." Maverick's reaction was immediate. His ears pricked forward, head lifting. With sudden attention, James remained still, allowing the dog to make the next move. After a moment of careful assessment, Maverick rose stiffly and approached, his posture cautious but no longer defensive. James extended his hand, palm down, in the non-threatening manner all military handlers used for initial contact. Maverick sniffed carefully, processing scents that connected James to his former life, the distinctive gun oil used by their unit, the particular laundry detergent from base facilities, the familiar human scent of someone who belonged to his. A world. Recognition dawned in the veteran dog's eyes. His tail gave a single tentative wag. Initial positive response, James reported to Torres, maintaining his cover while experiencing profound relief at Maverick's recognition. He's associating me with familiar command structures from his military conditioning. One last mission. Maverick's response was immediate, his posture straightening as training and purpose reawakened his warrior spirit. Despite weeks of Meridian's recalibration attempts, the core of the military working dog remained unbroken, waiting for the right command to activate. Asset 17 is being relocated to secure containment, James informed the technician as he led Maverick from the enclosure. Direct orders from Blackwood due to the security breach. The explanation was accepted without question. In the chaos of the alarm situation, the technician was focused on securing systems rather than questioning personnel movements. James led Maverick through the corridors with confident purpose, their synchronized movement reinforcing the appearance of authorized transport. They had nearly reached the exterior access point when an announcement echoed through the facility. Security alert. Unauthorized removal of Asset 17 in progress. All security personnel converge on East Corridor. Suspect is James Reeves, Level 2 clearance. Consider armed and dangerous. Their window of deception had closed. James abandoned the pretense of authorized movement, instead shifting to rapid tactical advance toward the nearest exit. Maverick stayed precisely at his side, the veteran dog's military training engaging flawlessly despite his age and physical condition. Extraction team, be advised, 2 for pickup, myself and a military working dog, James reported through his communication device. East perimeter compromised, shifting to extraction point Bravo. Acknowledged, came the response. Team repositioning to Bravo ETA 4 minutes. As they reached an exterior door, armed security personnel appeared at the far end of the corridor. James assessed options rapidly, noting that the guards were carrying standard security weapons rather than military-grade firearms. Meridian's contingency planning apparently hadn't anticipated an infiltration of this nature. Maverick, find exit, James commanded, using the military working dog protocol for identifying alternate routes. The veteran dog responded instantly, leading James away from the approaching guards toward a service corridor. His training in building, clearance and tactical movement emerged intact, demonstrating the indelible quality of military working dog preparation that Meridian had failed to erase. They navigated through maintenance areas, evading security teams through Maverick's superior sensory capabilities. The dog alerted to approaching personnel before visual contact, allowing James to adjust their route accordingly. Their synchronized movement reflected years of handler-dog tactical training, a partnership that transcended their brief reacquaintance. Finally, they reached a service exit leading to the compound's perimeter near extraction point Bravo. As James pushed through the door, Maverick suddenly tensed, his posture indicating an immediate threat. 2 security personnel appeared from concealed positions, weapons drawn. "Stop right there, Reeves," one ordered. "Release the dog and place your hands behind your head." James assessed the situation with combat-honed precision. The guards maintained professional distance, their positions offering limited options for non-violent resolution. Before he could implement a countermeasure, Maverick made the decision for him. With the instinctive protection response of a military working dog, Maverick launched forward, targeting the lead guard's weapon arm with precision that belied his age and condition. The controlled aggression, not aimed to maim but to disarm, created the momentary advantage James needed. He moved in concert with Maverick's action, disabling the second guard with practiced efficiency. Within seconds, both security personnel were incapacitated but not seriously injured, a tactical resolution reflecting James's military discipline. "Outstanding work, partner," James told Maverick, who had already returned to alert position at his side, watching for additional threats. The veteran dog's eyes held a rejuvenated focus, the purposeful clarity of a working dog reunited with his mission. They continued toward Extraction Point Bravo, a maintenance gate in the southeast corner of the compound where Walker's team would be waiting. Facility-wide alarms continued blaring, and James could hear vehicles mobilizing as Meridian implemented full security protocols. 60 seconds to extraction point, James reported through his communication device. Be advised, full facility lockdown in progress. Rapid extraction essential. Standing by at Bravo, came the response. Friendly forces have established perimeter control. Clear path to extraction vehicles once you breach the gate. As they approached the final barrier, James heard the distinctive sound of helicopters approaching. Meridian's rapid response team deploying aerial assets to secure the compound. Their window for clean extraction was closing rapidly. The maintenance gate appeared ahead, unguarded but secured with electronic locks. James deployed a specialized device provided by Chen's team, overriding the security system. As the gate swung open, he saw 3 unmarked SUVs waiting beyond the perimeter. Walker's extraction team providing armed security around the vehicles. Target acquired, the team leader confirmed as James and Maverick cleared the gate. Secure the package and prepare for immediate departure. As they reached the vehicles, James placed a reassuring hand on Maverick's shoulder. "Well done, soldier," he told the veteran dog quietly. "Mission accomplished." Maverick's posture reflected professional pride, the bearing of a military working dog who had once again fulfilled his purpose with excellence. Despite everything Meridian had done to break him, his core identity remained undiminished, waiting only for the right handler to reawaken it. As the extraction team secured their departure, James knew the most critical phase of their mission had been accomplished. They had obtained irrefutable evidence of Meridian's criminal enterprise, documented the corruption reaching into government agencies, and rescued Maverick from certain decommission. But the mission wasn't complete. Shadow remained at the farm safehouse, still recovering from his ordeal. The evidence they'd gathered would bring justice for all the dogs in Meridian's system, but James's personal commitment to his former partner remained unfulfilled. As the extraction vehicles sped away from Meridian's compound, James maintained tactical awareness while processing what they had accomplished and what remained to be done. The road ahead still held challenges, but they had crossed a critical threshold. From this point forward, they were no longer operating alone against a shadowy system. The evidence they'd secured had transformed their private mission into a federal case with the full weight of justice behind it. For the first time since finding Shadow behind that gas station, James allowed himself to feel a measure of hope. The path to justice was becoming clearer, and with it, the possibility of a new beginning for Shadow, Maverick, and all the other military working dogs betrayed by the system meant to protect them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.